So guys, we're all set. Are you ready?
Yay. Have fun, everybody. Enjoy yourselves. So nice to be in community together.
Let's let everybody in. As they come in one by one. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us. They're coming in. Mira. Hello, thank you for joining us. I am here today. My name is Karen Thompson from the Desmond-Fish Public Library, and I am here today with 8 wonderful poets for our second eco-poetry event. We're so glad that you could be here with us. Before I go any further, I just want to let you know that the chat will be on, and you are more than welcome to ask questions in the chat throughout the readings. You can make comments, ask questions, and we'll open it up to discussion at the end. Before I leave, I want to introduce Mary Noel, who is not only one of our poets, but she's the curator for all of our poetry events. Thank you, Mary, for being here.
Thank you, Karen, and thank the library for supporting this event. So when I started the Hudson Highlands Poetry Series, the idea was to have local poets gather in person. And that went on until the event we all know as the pandemic. And so I think it was in April of 2020 when we were going to have a live eco-poetry event and had to reconfigure it entirely to be online. But the online, although, as you know, has some restrictions, it also has the great possibility of enlarging geographically, both those who are reading and those who are listening. So here we've taken advantage of that to have our whole eco-poetry writing group reading together. Stephanie is going to mention a little bit about the chat and accessibility, and then we'll go on from there.
Thanks, Mary. Well, hello, welcome everyone. It's so lovely to see everyone in their squares. And as Mary mentioned, that Zoom does have this possibility of, extending across the world. So what a rich gathering. I just wanted to mention that with Zoom also there are wonderful accessibility possibilities, but also some limitations. So we have I just put in the chat an access copy of the poetry that we'll be reading in case it is supportive or helpful for you to read along with us. So you should be able from the chat just to click that link, and I'll keep posting it because I know as people come in, the chat needs to be refreshed. So just a moment for that. And also for the bios, you can also look towards the chat. I will be putting in all the readers' bios, as well as some links to check out more of their work. And then because we are such a global network here, I invite everyone to, if it's accessible to you, to put in the chat where you're zooming in from, including acknowledging the indigenous territory, if that's applicable for where you are. So I welcome you to just populate the chat with our locations, and welcome. I'm going to pass it back to Mary now.
I'd also like to jump in and say that at the end, I will also email everyone who's registered those links as well. So don't worry if you didn't get them off of the chat. I will send them to you after the event as well.
Okay, Karen, thanks once again. So I wanted to just speak briefly about this group, which is a wonderfully supportive critique group. We meet monthly on Zoom. Some of us have met in person, others only online. We share an engagement in language arts that includes a search for a poesis to fully evoke the vital multi-species world. We reside in Brooklyn, Garrison, and Nyack in the New York area, in Ohio, Michigan, Montana, and Panama. Our experiential and educational roots are as varied as our geographical diversity. Our group includes 2 scientists. Lori is a plant ecologist, Rebecca a botanist, 3 somatic practitioners, Stephanie and Petra are dancers and community performance artists, and I'm a practitioner of the Feldenkrais method of somatic education. Several of us teach in academic and community settings, edit journals or anthologies, translate. Several produce visual as well as verbal art. Some are particularly interested in reviving the wealth of word connotations that have fallen into disuse in our high-speed, technologically oriented world. And in our free time, we immerse ourselves in the human and more than human worlds through hiking, gardening, swimming, and numerous collaborative undertakings. Our writing is nourished from these varied roots. In our ongoing writing practices, we hone our perceptual and linguistic skills to serve our aspiration to help sustain the precious and threatened planetary community. I trust as you listen, you will appreciate both the uniqueness of each voice and our shared commitment. So it's my pleasure to introduce the first reader, Laurel Anderson.
Hi, everyone. It's a real honor to kick off this reading and to be in this community of wonderful writers. I'm going to read, excuse me, 2 poems for you today. The first one is called Prayer for the Phytoplankton. And phytoplankton are incredibly important organisms in aquatic communities. They form the base of the food web. Their photosynthesis produces about half of the world's oxygen. And they're also incredibly beautiful. My background today is 4 of the species that will be mentioned, particularly in my poem. I do use scientific names in the poem because I think that the language of the musicality of the Latin names is just really beautiful. And I like this poem because it brings together a lot of my scientific interests with poetic imagery. And I hope you like it too. So, prayer for the phytoplankton. Bless the diatoms encased in lacy nets of glass, turning in the drift like for the mirror. Bless the brown soil of their country on the underside of Arctic ice, where golden cells harvest trickles of light, feeding copepod, cod, seal, and bear. Bless the bear's great footfalls, shaking the algae cities from above as Ursus strides the white crown of the world. Bless Spirogyra with its chloroplast coiled between clear walls like a green serpent. Bless colonial volvox, whose cells gather in spheres and beat their whiptails in unison. Bless the unpronounceable coccolithophores, who bloomed in multitudes through deep time, whose bodies brighten the white cliffs of Dover and still ignite the Southern Ocean with gyres of turquoise. Bless the sweet sea broth the oyster pulls through its siphon, rich enough to shape into pearls. Bless the whales who quaff great mouthfuls as fuel for their long migrations. Bless the photic zone, thin layer of hope over fathoms of darkness. Bless the oxygen that swells half of all breath. Bless the secret glitter and pulse in each droplet. Bless the microscopic Milky Way that cradles us as we swim, drift, float, a single green cell shining in the void. So for my second poem, I'm going to read a poem that's titled, "What is the carbon footprint of this poem?" And carbon footprint is something that we can calculate actually for anything that we make. It takes into account all of the environmental resources that were used to produce whatever it is you're talking about. And this poem recently appeared in the journal Split Rock Review, and I'll leave the rest of the interpretation up to you. What is the carbon footprint of this poem? I can tell you the cost of the pen, notebook, laptop computer, even the tuition that taught me to read and revere the meanings of words. But I have not tallied the weight of coal or water or acres of land or chains of sugar spun from light that were spent for this poem. The true cost would include the fierce scent of pine trees just before the bite of the saw, jagged blue echoes off mountaintops before their removal, and the next line breaks should tumble and glitter like a poison stream, splashing through acid mine waste. I should write in some fish before they are gone, describe their iridescent flash, perfect hinged jaws, solemn gold eyes. The poem says, add some frogs with the right number of legs and smooth skin, unblemished by chytridiomycosis. If it could, this poem would fly you over leafscapes of rainforest canopy, hushed under mist at sunrise, then surprise with the throb and boom of howler monkey calls through the trees. If it could, this poem would take you somewhere so quiet you can hear erosion grind stones into sand. This poem knows there is such a place because it once crept in red shadows that settle in canyons at dusk and sipped at the silence collected there. This poem wants to bring you, soft in cupped hands, a young bluebird with speckled brown feathers, his adult blueness just starting to shine in his tail. This poem doesn't think this begins to make up for all that was lost, but this poem can only do what words born from darkness can do, make you love the broken world even more. Thank you very much. And now I will pass the reading on to Anupama.
There we go. Thank you, Lori. And that was such a wonderful reading. Thank you. And thank you so much to Mary and to Karen for organizing this reading. It's so nice to be reading with this group of eco-poets. And like Lori was reflecting on in her last poem, I've been asking myself a lot, what does poetry do? What does poetry contribute in this time of ecological crisis? And one of the answers that I've seen in a lot of poems and in my poems is to elegize, to look at the loss. So this first poem is titled Earth Writes Some Poems, and it's a reflection on the kind of elegy that the earth might write for us. When the earth writes its elegy for us, it will start with a description of our beautiful fighting, how our eyebrows curved like spears in flight, the stretched bow, horizon swerving missiles, drones, how our limbs, unyielding as basalt pillars, so often refused embrace. How the halcyon rivers became for us borderlines, bottom lines, furrow lines in the brow, instead of lifelines in open palms. How our tongues flicked like volcanic lightning, slicked like an oil spill, or filled with dirt to dam up song. How like magma our minds, how beautiful our hot blood. The poem might end, as most elegies do, with a metaphor on the high salt tears left in place of limestone. Or it might conclude with an anecdote, some small memory of our molten innocence, which earth alone remembers. Another way that I found that poetry engages and is another way in is that poems can soften the edges of conflict. And I've been reflecting on this as, where there's conflict among humans, it's so hard for us to kind of stop that and not be in conflict with the rest of the world as well, the natural world. So kind of thinking about what a poet can say. So the title of this is, I Will Be a Blue Lotus Today. Brother and sister only stop fighting when they are in ocean waves together, swimming in ocean roar together. Rain goes back to the ocean, and we take our attention along to hearten us, singing the poetry point down along with the barometric pressure. If the boatman offered it, to drive the gulls off, to end the deadlocked gaze between sail and shoal, to sign the waybill and tuck a placid anchor away, I might follow like a passerine cloud. But we only ever manage to call on heaven with the lowest note in the sea. An onion skin covering keeps the water off, but gives me away. Poems are meant for dribbling down a collar to cool the chest and calm its pelican-wide wings. And then this third poem, the third and last, I really reflected on the way that poetry also raises up heroes. And I think there are many heroes in this world of trying to repair and restore and preserve the scientists among us. So this poem was written at the beginning of the COVID lockdown. I was reading some articles in EOS, which is the Journal of the American Geophysical Union, about the quieting of human noise, and even about human-induced seismicity, which I mentioned in the poem, which is really the tremors in the earth from transportation and manufacturing and things. So it was really kind of interesting to read about the way that this was impacting scientific instrumentation. This is titled Elephant Stone. When we left, everything was normal, as likely as not, escaping what captivity love is in a knot. Sunrise eyes won't ever meet. Everything may be math, but not everything can be accomplished from the shore. No one will go replace the batteries and the moorings that measure marine life upwellings this spring. Research flights to the ice-locked ship are canceled. Scientists quarantined. What is not lost in a knot? Do you feel just like a frozen sea or a bottle of 70% ethanol spilled across a lab bench, or both, depending on the time of day? Human-induced seismicity is pitch perfect when it involves a virtual playdate with a puppy and too much chocolate. As our seismic noise drops to 60%, you could pull the sound of crashing ocean waves up to your chin like a blanket. It is cold in a knot. The sound frozen in a stone isn't cold at all. Stand up like that. That's it for mine. Thank you so much for listening. Next up is Rebecca.
Thanks so much, Anu. That was a beautiful reading. Thanks, Mary. Thanks, Karen. Thanks for my fellow eco poets today and for our connection. And thanks to all of you for coming and joining us. I'm going to read a couple poems, first from Half-Life of Empathy, and then I'll read a couple from my forthcoming manuscript. Red stem fillery. Into November's brown yawn, your perfect crimson intrusion keeps flinging. Your pink rosettes erode emptiness. Erodium from the Greek erodios, heron. Stork's bill, crane's bill, red stem fillery. The shroud of your red ruse, of color, of naming what is here without. What does the sky call you? The sky calls me nothing. The next poem I'm going to read, I wrote after encountering a wolverine in Glacier National Park. We left to let them stew in their predicament. Irradiated gaze, the wolverine stops within feet of me, eyes me. The derivative of noiselessness roils between us. Amoeboid clouds hover over ozone holes. Who am I to know this animal? The instant pivots sharply to fill the cavern with more than the known whole. They always seek me, they find me open and listening. In an eternal moment, the mind is subsumed by the indispensable condition. She tucks me in her lope, my arms clasp her brown gait. I dredge snow, glacier lilies, and trilliums. The sky is peevish and the forest peevish, but somehow lavish. I shed my false density in the you and hold fast. Lash to brisk vision, she derides the ultimate. I find the cedar trees intact, the creek still moving. My body no longer holds me and I spill out there among the argillite. In the thick of the giant correction, crises clot sufficiently gray. Why does she come so close? We find estrangement in tangibles, the perennial question of encounter. Why does she look at me like that? The lance of storm gnashes its groan across the wilderness, cracked and browned. In memoriam, cheap resources pile like swag. She could rip me open with those claws before I uncap the spray. What is left to empty? Everything since has been built with falseness. Eyes me, eyeing eye. Consider Pleiades, responsible and traceable materials, products astrally astray. Consider darkness, no longer the body that smothers us. And the next poem I'm going to read, next two poems are from my forthcoming manuscript with Shanti Arts. It should be out hopefully pretty quick in the new year here. It's called Lossless. Sky prow touches treetops, and never were such soundings, woven waves unraveling, and illuminated goldenrod scattered on hills, whirled with asters. When sparrows fledge, the alder's green faith spills the swarm and invents the whittled air, and we, beside, nominate the instant, and gaze summon the interior cobble, and allow for the evolution of voices. Furrowed colossal luss with toppled trunks, as though we sipped salient swells of pliant lilacs, and lived to bloom like azure plum chandeliers, and ask the firefly's pinwheeling pulse and sentience, plus a tempered dome of geometry, of cliff gusts, gusseted by coils of crystals and testament of vaulted atolls, the cries of eagles and cathedrals of consequence, and all trivial mass impassive past the glass. And the last poem I will read is from a long poem in Lossless called Arboreal Burial. Start with a tear, an incision, a mockery of trees, effrontery, bark and lichen guts spilled on the forest floor. There is a will submerged, encrusted with dust, a pattern of utterance constrained in history, without distress or qualification, customary manifestation. Unnerved by dazzling ecologies, minds deform ideas of what should be. The previous expansive splendor, not disrespected but not untouched, flare of a dragonfly, an iridescence that broke shadow. I imagined us there, imagined persistent wilderness, a realm of water, not brackish, not fracked. I'm not sure if anybody was there. Thanks so much, everyone. And now we will have the talented Stephanie Height.
Oh, thank you so much, Rebecca. And I feel like I'm stepping into the space that's just vibrating with such a beautiful web of poems. And thank you to Mary for bringing us all together. And thank you to Karen and the Desmond-Fish Public Library for all of your support too. I am going to read two pieces, and where I live and where I grew up, well, basically, I just love the water and I love being in the water. And both of these poems emerge from that love. And before I read these, I just want to invite you to take a moment to tune into the fluids in your own body, to perhaps listen from those fluids. So just thinking whatever that means to you, just to touch into something fluid. Underwater arbitration. Make an oath. We aren't in this together. You, distant flashing wings. Me, oceanscape. Yes, there are animals of various toe counts populating our respective environs. Yes, amphibian dexterous. I can chameleon all over your terrain. You forget the answer. Pull an ellipse, spook the delirious edge, leave town like tumbleweed, no light, no boot prints, no claws. What is your molecular attachment? Shapes, symmetries, patterns of growth? Is it a fang it and bristle kind of day? I more flutter and glide, more gelatin and tentacle dream. The rift between our words, loose gravel, river rock, binocular porn. And the next piece I'm going to read actually recently appeared in the current issue of Sonora Review. And this one was written in California along the coast, where I spent some time observing sea otters, and they made their way into this somewhat fantastical piece. Water Island of the Yellow Boot Brigade. Island of water and ocean's midst, populated by inhabitants, plant, animal, human, other, all wearing yellow rain boots, custom made for their particular extremities, be they hoof, paw, web, fossorial, vertebrate, rhizome, stilt, tuberous, contractile. One might think this is yet another island under imperial rule or striving for uniformity, but the occupants enjoy their slick feet. They provide a festive air, an antidote to the constant rain. Precipitation is key to the sweetwater oasis in a sea of salt. Protection is needed, and the boots, perhaps because of the bright yellow color, increase the water's surface tension. The island is bottomless. If you break through the surface, infinite depths, gravity is grave. This means no swimming unless you cross the island threshold of sea otters into the ocean. A #1 pastime here, since the sea otters like to perform their peripheral functions in a carnival parade vibe. They provide escort to and from the island, often in circuitous routes. To live here, it is helpful to have experiences with losing ground, whether mood cliffs or literally a tendency to fall, disobey gravity, tightrope walk. Because to survive this island is a taste of balance and push, and the ability to find upright on multiple planes. Think roly-poly. And with all the rain, the inhabitants develop membranes similar to the island's surface, become waterproof, and also more nimble with emotions in a roll off a duck's back sort of way. The inhabitants are good at sort and let go. Living on water with no bottom to touch, thoughts and feelings are more fluid. So when an ancient impulse arises in an oak tree to flock, it quickly realizes that a seagull talk. Not that the island trees are mobile. Their roots don't weave through dirt, but are encased in the yellow slickers and anchored by some magnetic pull or compass trick. Hydroponic, of course. Or when a human has the desire to drop seed and proliferate and then notices the lilacs in bloom nearby. The island could be a make it or break it resource for the Anthropocene, given the renewable and unlimited water. But the sea otters aren't sharing latitude or longitude data. Not that the island is even on a sailor's grid. And there are only so many yellow boots the surface will push against. Thank you so much. And I have the great pleasure to introduce Petra Kuppers.
Thank you. It is such a delight to go after Stephanie's amazing poem. That was just so beautiful. Thank you. And I'm so glad to be here. Many thanks to the organizers, many thanks to Mary and to Karen. And I'm just so delighted to be in the company of these amazing poets here. So, and thanks all of you for turning up in Zoom fatigue time. So I'm glad you're here. And I'm one of these somatic practitioners that Mary spoke about at the beginning. So I'm going to invite you to go on a journey with me. I'm going to read 2 poems. The first one is literally a journey. We are starting out, and those of you who know San Francisco will recognize the Embarcadero. Okay, so we're going to be around the Embarcadero and you'll see the water not far off. And we're now going to go on a journey down into that water. Okay, so enjoy the journey. After the whales, upon drifting at Fisherman's Wharf, San Francisco. She steps outside the bounds of the security camera. Gray stuccoed walls contract behind her. Glass arrows compressed from the rotating doors. A leash of chrome lunges toward her, disappearing back. Too late. She is already over the street's hump. The bay wings at the bottom, fluke up to mauve sky. Her legs churn warm pavement. Bitumen remembers mammoth bones, liver collapse, reptile teeth, marks glom, red rubber soles. The street descends steeply. Creepers dart from shuttered shop windows. Night flowering orchid bats jab into her nostrils. Green dog shit children, fly buzzes her naked shin. Rusty spoke slalom, the embankment pools around her like a suede skirt. Beyond, ghost ships hulk in the channel. Thin oil layers, salt water into sinus waves. Fish stink roils up her arms, lodges a translucent scale where her toes burst free. The sandal, so tender, membrane. She steps onto the harbor's mirror. Heel first, she slips into the bardo of salt. Depth rushes her hair follicles into contraction. Sound tugs forward, mouth sucks her beyond the red bridge. White shadows cruise at the far edges of sight. Below bend last violet rays into crust, the black. Submarine bubbles streak her with luminance. Sediment, soft, open basement, doors to forgotten chambers. Eyeless choir keens into silicon heat. A judgment of gelatinous weave holds her tight. Her brain streams amino acids, pressure curves, horsetail branches purple. A diode sings beyond. They fall, all fall. Her spine now pulses, choir rears. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed that journey. The poem is published in About Place, which is a wonderful home for those of us who do eco-poetic work. And there is a new call coming out very soon. So please check out About Place, which is the journal of the Black Earth Institute. The second poem I'm going to read to you is from this book. This is Botany, which has this beautiful sturgeon on it. And this book came out in 2020. And one of the segments from Botany is called Moon Botany. And Moon Botany came about when I was at an artist residency, and in that residency, I'm a wheelchair user, so I can't really get about the way that, you know, your average eco-poet usually gets about. I'm not really much of a walker out in the hills, but I was there with friends, and one of the friends was Sharon Siskin, a visual artist, and she went every day on a nature hike and then brought back material. So I was a bit stuck, but of course I was working. You know, those of you who go to artist residencies know the feeling. Bit stuck yet working. That's like it's like a thing about artist residencies. But every afternoon I found some beautiful object from out there in the world on the table outside my door. And so I would spend then the next day writing a response, writing something in the voice of these objects that came my way. So they became these persona poems, which are called Moon Botany poems. And I'm doing a lot of workshops and stuff like that with that kind of idea of writing persona poems for those of us who have a more mediated relationship to the great outdoors. So here's one of those. And the what we found on the pond deck is the husk of a tiny dragonfly. So the poem is called Found on the Pond Deck. The husk of a tiny dragonfly, translucent, clings upside down on a yellow spear of grass. Its roots clasp the dry wood of the deck. Tiny white fibers everywhere. The planks, breathing, expectorate their innards. Wool weeps and uncoils what it knew when it stood tall in a wet redwood forest before the chains of a truck bed, dark and long, bite here, where all trees are twisted into themselves against the prevailing winds. On that white spun deck, I remember my watery nature, pour my liquid body to wash away the pain of the shorter years, to wash away the pain of a hollow embrace, the feeling that we all will slide, not into the clear pool, but into the murk of a place that should not be settled. Thank you so much. Thank you. And I'm handing over to poet Karen Neubeck.
Thank you, Petra. That was very beautiful, and the amazing journey you took us on. Thank you. And thank you, Mary, for bringing us together, and Karen for featuring us here all together. And thank you, everyone, for coming. When I reflect on the ecological crisis and then write about it, it frequently comes out in the form of a dystopian future. So I'm going to read 4 poems, and 2 of them will be those. And then I've tried to leap into a new place and just be here with what I find beautiful. So the first poem is called Recalibration. Surface brio, landscapes of change. What was ocean? What was land? What was? What might have been remembered is not. Winking stars, hybrid flotsam, the jetsam of abstruse, unimagined evolving. As time continues, consumes itself, in some realm perhaps, the oldest gods wait to be reborn. Oops. And the next poem is another envisioning of a possible, very dystopian future. I often think about all the animals that we're losing. And I love what the poet C.A. Conrad wrote when he talked about vibrational absence. He said, I lie on the ground and listen to various recordings of recently extinct birds, mammals, and reptiles, especially from the past several decades. These creatures with all their many songs existed in real time at my birth in 1966. Children born today in 2015 are being formed on less than half my generation's organic wild songs. And I'm reading a poem called Old Game. In yet to be hours, the remaining children play the old game. Milling around each other, they jump and lumber, walk on all fours, leap, roll, sniff, hug, flap arms, and make assorted noises, snorts, barks, buzzes, grunts, trumpets, roars, low and high-pitched cries, until one by one, they clutch themselves and fall. When all are down, another child sprinkles them with powder, said to contain horn and tusk, beak and claw, while reciting in a solemn voice names memorized by heart. Whale, bat, bee, tiger, falcon, bobcat, wildcat, zebra, gray wolf, jaguar, dolphin, giraffe, manatee, terrapin, ocelot, elephant, gorilla, polar bear, rhinoceros, hippopotamus, orangutan. And with each name said, a child raises an arm. And this is the game the children play. And its name is sorrow. The next poem is a cento, so that it's comprised completely of lines from other poets. And I'll read the names of the poets after I read the poem. It's called I See Something. Behind everything, I see something, the light called, and I come to the heart of sight where I ask what I'm doing here, ask what I'm going to do with this ball of string unraveling, while all the 10,000 things billow, so trusting I could weep. There's a price for living, and there must be a word for how light finds me speaking to the trees as if I were a birch among birches, while everywhere, 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 terrible things and beautiful things continue to happen beside each other. And the sources in order of the lines: Forrest Gander, Natalie Diaz, Jennifer Spector, Shayla Lawson, Rustin Larson, Lee Bai, Sharon Olds, Chelsea Dingman, Michael Johnson, Catherine Barnett, Warsanshire, and Jeffrey Morgan. And for my last poem, this is called Let Me Sing the Garden. Let me sing green and stroll the garden, collect the yellows and purples, bathe in the luxury of butterfly and bee. Let the hummingbirds hum the afternoon light, let the fireflies light the blue hour. Let me sing the garden. Let me be a tree, let me reach into the song of the seasons. Let the seasons keep their pace steady in promise. Let the promise be a garden. I'm lost in a dream with no garden, lost in a world where green is lost, where creatures are lost, some who we never met or named. Let me sing the garden, sing the birds, sing the flowers. Let me sit in the crotch of a tree. Let me be a nest. Thank you. Sorry, I got so excited there. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Mary Newell.
Mary, you are muted. Hold on here.
Greetings once again, now that you can hear me. And I'm just adjusting my light to not be in my face. I'm going to read 3 poems about hummingbirds. And one was published in Blaze Fox. One is in my new chapbook, which is called Research. And I just wanted to say briefly the 3 parts of my fascination with hummingbirds. I'm really interested in pollinators in general. I'm a sort of native plant gardener, and hummingbirds do their part. In fact, they have, as a species, created a whole new color of salvia. The ultraviolet salvia was created by mixing pollen. So one of my poems is about that. Of course, they migrate very impressively from South America. But the most touching thing about hummingbirds really has to do with their heart and their heartbeat. They do have the fastest heartbeat among birds. And I've had the great honor of being acknowledged a couple of times by a hummingbird in my yard, with the seeming at arm's distance, hovering for long enough that it's hard for me not to believe that it was an expression of appreciation. And it really affected me directly, in my heart. So here goes. Covivance. Hummingbird tangles with salvias. Generations of entwine fold into this smooth bonding. Locomotes by quiver, broadcasts by wing whir, ripple of flight wake, figure 8 spinouts flash iridescent green, needs frequent sweets to sustain fast pulsing heart, whiz zip, hover, to sip with forked tongue, drawing nectar from deep-throated blooms. Salvia's trapdoor stamens rub pollen on transfixed head of sipper, who soon flits with gold corona to blend pollen from mauve and blue salvias, forging the new ultraviolet tone. And this second poem is actually unpublished. I think it speaks for itself. Calamity fade out. During pandemonium, names of old friends echo, call quick to verify they remain among the visible. Some still on the map, but fading out of likeliness. Meanwhile, hummers and salvias, that coevolutionary duo, together again and again throughout the Americas, yet threatened with shrinking habitat. Delectable details recorded of various joyas voladoras, flying jewels. Last seen last century, Godin's turquoise-throated puff leg. Mostly green with blue undertail coverts and white powder puffs of downy feathers on the legs, and the male has a bluish purple throat patch. Recently named, already endangered, blue-throated hill stars of Andean cloud forests, Colibri de Chimborazo. Their names. If you left behind no name tag or little else, who will remember your nickname? Was it jazz crazed, lead from behind, walked life lightly, knew a thing or two, dressed to bamboozle, helpful when you called her, never home. Among hummers, the names of the endangered ones roll over in your mouth. Coligenia orina, dusky start frontlet, colibri de viento de zafiro, sapphire-bellied hummingbird, calzadito admirable, colorful puff leg. That one, so far, still on the map. So out of the 28, out of the number of hummingbird species, 28 have disappeared, which is about 8% of the total number. And this is my final poem, which is kind of asking for hummingbird flavor. Intervolve, O voltaic garden flit, your volant frivels smile me. Your circumvolutions, phosphorescence on gyrating windlasses, fructuous volery, O profligate pollen disperser, emit a hint how not to clutch so hard it shreds tendons, rips heart house. Infuse your joy in volatility, deep intake, plunge into spacious. Thank you. And I have the pleasure of introducing our last but not least reader, Jennifer Spector.
Hello, it's really a great pleasure to be here with all of you. Thank you, and thank you for those readings. They're so beautiful. To follow in conclusion is an honor. I'm going to read a couple poems from my newly published collection. It's my first collection of poetry called Height, which is a small landing place by a river. In case you're not familiar, it's an old word, but it's still in use. The first poem is called Mid-Routière, and routière being a sailing ship log of the sea before the advent of navigational charts. So it recorded ports, routes, wind, tides, other sorts of information that might need to be recorded. Mid-Routière. Nenia slaked by flame, late breath in maw of winter, snow fern and reed beds fray off Mother Rick and Tinder. December's grained watchings casting jettons on the slab, an abacus drawing dust through the prescient rowans and crossed points in routière and desertum. Is it work of the sea what crowds a room? If I were glove, if I were spiral, if I swale, if I were angle, of fire speak if I castle, if I were drawer, if I 3 stones to air, if tattle, if I fail, if I terraria chose or stare, if ocelot, if newly rare, if I foreigner, if tracking mare, if I fetch were if I wear and were I home. 2. Where to hunt, where to crawl, what intoning from plum interior. Oral loads, cold fleet traction braiding what traveled before us to the living shed of earth and language in temporal mechanisms. Strath of body, boat and drifter. Pulling material co-presence. For every photon, earth giving her 20 more, salt ringing broad basins, autumn's kitsch and sere fruit wreathed in emergence. Height of discards, tipped of place, briefly landing, extension. 3. At the tide gate, half-timbered banked canoes and waders rimming sand, unsaying low water. If I timber, if I decay, if young, if crudely made, if I present tide unworn, if ream, if pond, if I pour, if I were linnets or if stone rivered, if I grow wood, if I were giver, if motion stolen, if I were buttoned, if I were bowl, if my ilex or full, were I or if another, this place I thrift flower. Is house the girl? Structural bow under gauged reliction, returned, flipping the thatch. Cordage, rift limb, ground patter in new distance. 4. What last bodice, diminished structure, dissembled in the straits, draws larch across lound quay to the boathouse, waymarked in the ruins, running for the river. Wood, if given, if motion rendered, if I were room, if swift frost barrow, if silk, if sled, if I cower, if odic lent were I night waver, if I kedge to cindered hour off salt or forward saddle, if I shed or burn chart echo, if shore, if turns, if I marrow, tansent, transfer, pinning the groundsel to fret measure. And the second poem is short to close. Notions left. Winter sails the branches, follows the deer, passes the wormwood, passes the drifter, also following the snow. A kind of charter, or perhaps notion, that our leaving is marked. Thank you. You are all now very warmly welcome to stick around and join in our discussion. If you have questions or if you have any comments or reflections, they are all welcome. Just unmute.
You have anything you want to say?
I also wanted to let everyone know that if you would like to ask a question specifically, rather than in chat, you can put it in chat, or you can raise your hand and I will unmute you. That's your question.
Drinking coffee.
That was just amazing work, everybody. Thank you so much. It's such a delight to be in this company. It is amazing. So let's see if people have queries for us. But we have been meeting for quite a long time now. And it's just been amazing to be in it, to actually read together. So I just want to express how moved I am to hear everybody read full on, which is very different from how we read when we're working with our poems in our session.
Let me just say, if you have a lot of noise in your background, please mute yourself. It sounds like someone's in a coffee shop or somewhere, because it's going to make it hard to hear. So you can mute yourself in the upper right-hand corner of your box. Thank you.
I'm just
well, I'll just go ahead and say thank you to everybody who read. What a wonderful feeling for your words to wash over my ears, my experience, my heart, seeing your faces, hearing your words, just such a gift. So much of what is coming to me, all of us is prefabricated, pre-made stuff, words as well as things. And the freshness and the heartfeltness, the the time and the wisdom that's in your words. It's just, there's nothing like art that is originated from a maker, a spark, a maker. And to witness that and feel that is just makes me so happy, feeds me deeply. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Can I say one more thing? Stephanie asked us to think about the fluids in our body. And I went ahead and made that.
Oh, wow.
So I don't know if that, if maybe that contributes.
Oh, I love it. That's wonderful. I'm so glad that you are moved to make during.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thanks, Sarah.
Well, if I'm still on, I want to particularly call out my dear friend Jennifer Spector, and watching your art grow over the years, you know, to a tree, the tree that it is now. Like, I'm so glad to be here and hear you.
Thank you, Sarah. You know, your drawing, everyone should know, Sarah does incredible work with the silk ropes and extension of the spine. And so I think that in her art and her approach, she really thinks back into the body into a certain kind of way that's really connected. And she's a practitioner in many ways: ceramics, painting, drawing, and then with the body as well. So thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, Jennifer. Yeah.
I want to give a shout out to some of the poet dancers who have joined us here. It's been really lovely to get these messages from around the world throughout. You know, like we have a whole bunch of people who are on that somatic edge here. So it's just been lovely to read this to you and to get these lovely poetic responses back in our chats here. Thank you.
It's a silent crowd.
It's like your average Zoom crowd. Zoom is so hard. It's hard to kind of speak up in Zoom spaces. It would be so much nicer now if we could just, you know, get around the corner and have a nice drink together in the local pub. That would be way fun right now.
Let's do that.
I know.
Well, I have a suggestion. Maybe we could talk about edges and boundaries. Such a part of ecopoetics is looking at the rim of things, the places where things intersect or spread into or disappear from, or maybe just the general idea of kind of an ecotone of edges. If anyone from their somatic perspective or artistic specific or even unrelated work and life mergings, maybe there's a reflection on that of what, how do you get to the material of your work when you're working along the edges or the margins of places in transit, places shifting.
I'm happy to share a bit with this, talking about somatic work. For me, I feel like my experience with improvisation really supports my writing, as well as just this uncertainty that we are living in, not only with the pandemic, but also with climate change. I'm thinking about, for myself, I have a series where I'm actually moving, swimming and dancing along the edges of Lake Michigan on the shorelines. And at one point that was marking the rising of Lake Michigan, how high the waters were. And now that has, that has shifted again. So just this, how to respond rather than, react during these times, and how to try to create connections and awareness and just cultivating just those skills to be able to adjust and lean in and shift, and how to mark that on the page, you know, within writing. For me, sometimes as a dancer, that happens spatially. Like, how do you note like a pit of the gut feeling when the beach that I've walked my whole life is underwater because Lake Michigan has risen so much? Just those kind of questions. And I will pass it off to someone else because I know we have a lot of different experiences in here.
I would be happy to put myself out there if you want to hear. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I like the idea of ecotones so much, and the ecotones are shifting because of the climate changing. And like listening to everybody today, it occurs to me that there's an ecotone of joy and sadness, and like how that joy and sadness shifts around, just like different species shifting around into other species kind of traditional homeland, if you would. Anyway, it's just kind of interesting, the thought of the ecotone of joy and sadness and how that moves, and they both occupy the same space as me. So yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you, everybody, for sharing your deep reflections.
Thank you, Davy. I love what you just said about the kind of edge between joy and sadness, because that is one of the edges that I find myself writing in. So as my fellow people here know, I'm working on a new book that engages with the murders of young women in Michigan in the late 60s, the famous Michigan murders, as well as murders of women in Detroit, which is not far from here, just 3 years ago, just before the pandemic started. And the edge that I find myself writing in, and the book also looks at species extinction, of course, at the changes, at climate change. So the edge I find myself writing in is the joy of being in space, in the moment, somatically engaged with what is there, celebrating, being in tune with, tuning myself to what surrounds me, and yet at the same time holding on to the catalog of death and deathliness that surrounds and suffuses the soil where I work and where I write. So holding those two together without one erasing the other is one of the edges I find myself writing in as an eco-poet. Any of the lands that I am working on have deep histories of violence. How do I narrate that, and yet at the same time still find moments of joy, moments of tissues opening towards otherness in the site?
David has a question.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I was intrigued by what Jennifer said about edges and margins. And hello, Mary.
I can't see who's speaking.
You can't see me. Well, when I wrote a poem, I wrote the first word on one day, and I had to wait a day to put the second word in. So you'd say there's a considerable margin there between the first and the second word, and the question of edge, seems universal. How can anything be seen or experienced without recognizing the edge. So, and it has a lot to do with how one's poem is read or spoken, seems to me.
Well, yes, and I think it's wonderful if we hear the sounds and the silence, you know, that edge is kind of fluid between sound and silence. But I also feel in order to really see the world, we have to keep challenging the edges that are given artificially, you know, the sense of self, how we define the self or the human perspective. And of course, we're stuck in the human perspective, but most of us try imaginally to be able to see the world from other larger or different perspectives, because otherwise we're always putting frames that are artificial. You know, the whole Western world is what's called the carpentered world. We see everything through windows and doors, these square frames on the screen here, right? And yet we know that the world at root is energy. It's moving and it's vital, and it, you know, is making combinations, self-organizing. And a lot of what I try to resist is this imposing of patterns and edges where they are mental and not organic, not real, you know, not really related. So that's one part of it.
Well, would it be acceptable if I read 4 lines from somebody else's poem, not my own, or would that be out of keeping with the program?
I think we just want to keep a discussion going now, if you don't
Okay,
mind.
all right. I'll just tell you, I won't read it, but I'll tell you what it is. It's Blake's poem called Eternity, but you can look it up.
And it looks like we have a question. I see Leslie has a hand up there. Yeah, please, thanks. Oh, there. I just, oh, if you unmute yourself, I don't.
Okay, I'm unmuted now, thanks. Can you all hear me? Yeah, so I'm really, first of all, I've said it in the chat, but thank you all for the reading. It was really exciting from a poetic point of view and from an ecological and political point of view. And I especially, so Karen Newberg is the person who invited me, and thank you, Karen. And I hadn't realized how body-centered everybody, so many of you were, and somatic as well as eco-poetic. And so I'm very excited because I'm a dancer and a poet, but I'm also ethnographically trained. And what I hear people talking about, both in your own poetry and in this discussion, are the ways in which we can circumvent the anthropocentric point of view that we have, which is seeing everything from our own human perspective. And so I'm really struck with what I think of as, from my own perspective, as the ethnographic possibilities of what you're talking about in terms of how to get outside ourselves and see things from not only another culture's perspective, but from another species perspective or another, well, if we count all plants and so on as species, or water, the perspective of water. And so that's one of the things I find really inspiring. And what I found in ethnography is that it's a constant exercise, right? That we have to put ourselves through constant exercises to keep getting outside of who we are as a particular culture or a particular species. And that's what you all have been modeling for me today, among other things. So I just wanted to say thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Leslie. It's lovely to hear your response.
I wanted to chime in too on this idea of, I mean, I think Leslie gives me a good platform for some of the things I think about. As a biologist, I really am trying to understand what it's like to be alive in a whole different way, and also teach my students that things that they don't perceive as living, often because they don't move, are truly alive and have their own very unique perspectives on the world that are just as valid as our movement centered, heterotrophic type of approach to the world. And I have found poetry to be a powerful way to also teach about science. I haven't really leaned into that. I do a lot of very traditional scientific teaching, but I would really like to move in that direction where the ecotone between science and poetry becomes much more fluid, and we're able to talk about things with kind of the reverence and vibrancy that poetry brings, but also with some of the kind of evidence-based and just the huge body of knowledge we've acquired as scientists that I think really helps us understand that there are many ways to be alive, which I think is important to acknowledge.
Thanks, Lori. I love that ecotone between science and poetry. That's something that I've been thinking about a lot too, because I have a lot of scientist friends here who work in the climate school at Columbia University, and I'm often the only poet in the room. But it's, sort of, one thing that I find really interesting in that ecotone is the the way that we go about generating knowledge is in some ways very similar, between poets and scientists. It's maybe the desire behind that knowledge is a little bit different, but I think that some of the ways that they're similar are just really lovely. And anybody else want to say something about that ecotone? That's a fascinating one.
Yeah, I'll jump in. I'm also very interested in the boundaries between science and poetry, and I did a bunch of research on this topic about what the historical relationship was. And if you think about back in the day, a lot of knowledge was transferred through poetry. So this whole like science over here and poetry over here, this is a very, very modern dichotomy. So yeah, I've often been thinking about and trying to incorporate, I always have incorporated a fair amount of science in my work, I feel like, but thinking about, kind of pressing the limits of that, and where are those limits, and having knowledge and scientific knowledge in a poem, but yet still having it be sort of in that liminal space that poetry inhabits, that keeps it more engaging in sometimes than just, straight up, information-based prose. So yeah, it's something I think about a lot. And I think, art has a huge role to play in kind of bringing, knowledge and scientific knowledge and climate issues into the mainstream. So something I continue to think about and work on as well.
You're muted. No, you're not.
How's that? Yeah, I was really taken by the musicality of a lot of the work read today, and in thinking about Jennifer's point on ecotones and transitions, and thinking about some of the things I've worked in is acoustics in environmental sampling and things like that. And really enjoying the musicality of a lot of the poems today, especially from is it Anupama and Petra, Jennifer, Stephanie, just the red and spoken part of it really kind of appealed. So I thought that was interesting. Anyway, it's kind of not really, we don't really think, I think, how much we read poetry all the time, but how beautiful it is to hear it spoken, and you get into the cadence and some of the nuances of kind of body language only applied to the linguistics and the spoken word. I thought that was kind of nice.
Thank you, Joe, for those comments and for everyone in this discussion so far. Just drawing on that for a second, as far as these edges and these spaces of transit that we all traverse, whether it be through body practices or written word or visual art, I do feel that in all of those motions, no matter where you're coming from and where you think you're going, there has to be a translation of sort. And lately I've become extremely interested in this idea of translation that people that are actually translating works of art are doing. And because I feel that it really has a broad arm into linguistics and into the poetry of shifting, moving through edges, and moving through the edge that we might all be on now, tipping over to a place of a different kind of place that we are now with the state of the earth and the planet. And in that spatiotemporal kind of canopy, I feel the body is also connected to that. Even though we want to, I really appreciate the comments about seeing everything from our different perspectives. But unfortunately, we are trapped in a human shell. And so one of the things that I try to do linguistically is find a tie to the earth that is linguistic in order to shift my perspective, perhaps within my own self, because we are this basin kind of swishing around in there. And how do we get out of that? And how do we use our language to extend outward, to actually use the body to make a shift? I don't know. It's trying to get out of the head into the body or into the head. I don't know which goes first, but perspective, it's an interesting thing. For me, it's very much tied into translation. How do you translate off of that energy? How do you take the energy of what it is and translate it in what you're doing, in the making, in the creation?
I want to take this moment while we're all thinking of those things to let you all know. I just want to make sure we don't end this without letting you know that this event was partially funded by poets and writers, and all of these poets are part of that organization, and we're so grateful to them for helping us fund almost all of our events that we've asked to fund. So thanks to them so much. Or do we have any other questions or comments, or anyone else want to say anything? Oh, we do have a hand up again here. David Page.
I think Sarah Davis too.
I didn't see that one.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to ask, where is she, Jennifer? Could she just say again what you mean by translation? It sounds so provocative.
Translation, it's really a very open-ended, kind of broad-armed approach. I don't know where it's going yet, but it's just kind of my project in a way to to take from the land, especially landscape, but I don't mean that in the picturesque kind of way. I mean it more in like 2 feet on the ground, trying to realize that the time is brief here, to figure out what it is to draw from and then what to leave behind in word. So the translation is really personal, individual for every person and every being. And I love these artists that are now working with recording echolocation, listening to the sounds of dolphins, whales, sounds of trees, sounds of other forms of life in alterity, and also beyond that, perhaps the realms beyond this living life, you know, perhaps realms of people that have passed on, or kind of a more oceanic stratosphere, these kinds of translations. And then we all have our own more internal translations that have to do with memory, lineage, places, everything you carry with you as you move through life. So for me, it's not really a concrete answer. It's just an approach.
It's very, very concrete, concrete. Thank
So
you.
I think Sarah Davis had a question.
Oh, thank you, Mary. Yeah, this is such a familiar feeling, like having so much to say and wanting to share so much, and like just realizing how much everybody else has too, and not knowing, how far to go and how much of the content to engage. So yeah, I feel I have such a clear answer for you, Jennifer. How to start. We have to acknowledge the layers of sensitivity that we encompass in our evolved, what we've evolved to has so many layers of sensitivity and awareness in it. And the more we can extend that sensitivity and awareness into our environment, just like Laurel was saying about, different scales, what's an edge is a horizon. So the horizon between a macro and a micro, the fact that we encompass that edge is so tiny. It's infinitesimally, vanishingly smallly fine, the edge of micro. And you can locate yourself on that horizon with all the integrity that you can. And what that means is like, how much information are you letting in? How much of what's coming at you is feeding you, and how much is, violating your trust? How much can you incorporate the history that you feel in the land you're standing on in your own experience, that edge between happiness and between elation and despair? Allowing ourselves to feel all that we feel, and the fact that for whatever reason, we have the ability to imagine ourselves into such deeply different places than our own nature has, than what's good for us, than what we should do. And those sensitivities, allowing that witnessing, allowing that experience. And you know what it means? It means not using shampoo anymore. It means fixing your laundry soap. It means getting rid of the Tylenol. It means your food. It means not quarreling with your family.
Well, thank you. I think one thing that I have been really concerned with in the past was the idea of permeable boundaries. That there are all these between the cellular level and larger levels between us and the environment. There are boundaries, but how can they be permeable so that we let in more? At the same time, of course, permeable boundaries have some dangerous aspects. So that's one kind of thing to think about. How much are we willing to risk being open in one way or another in order to receive more of what's really going on in the universe.
Thank you.
Well, I'd like to once again thank all of our wonderful poets for being here with us today, and all of you who came to join us, whether you're here live or watching it on recording later. And feel free to watch this again, and as it will be available soon. I will email out everyone the links that were proposed, that put in today, and the recording of this event. Once again, thank you again, everyone, and we'll hope to see you next time. Bye-bye.